So I'm going to try and share my screen and look over a plot, look over Frozen. Like Tim was saying earlier with this, the plots and everything else are owned by the lighting designer. And so anything up in these drop boxes, you really shouldn't share and stuff. And Frozen, for example, I'm happy to share that with you, but I can't give you a copy of it. So I'm going to see if I can do a screen share and walk you around that. If that doesn't work out as well as we would like, someone let me know, and we can switch over to some of the PDFs that I've uploaded in Dropbox. So great. So this is Vectorworks, and this is looking at the Frozen light plot. And what I want to do is I want to go over some of the components of it and talk about specifically why we do the things that we do on Broadway. And then I have several other examples of ways to both organize files and the important things to keep on files, etc. Like I was saying earlier, I learned to hand draft and no one ever taught me. So I am not the best person to teach you how to use Vectorworks necessarily. There are amazing videos online that Nemechek has published about tricks and stuff. There's also a great little book that you can buy that talks about drafting for theater. And I highly recommend both of those things. But I want to talk about kind of the Broadway way of doing things, some of the reasons why we do stuff, and how we end up with the products we do. I hope you can see this all well, and I'm going to kind of zoom in. So this is Broadway, and when we do Broadway, everything that you need to do needs to have some kind of way you should quickly be able to see what show you're working on at all times. Whether this is a lighting plot, whether it is a spot sheet, or everything else, you need to kind of brand your paperwork so that it's so easy for them to pick it up. So we're going to talk about different components. We'll talk about the actual drawing, but first I want to talk a little bit about the page and kind of some of the setups and things that you're seeing, and then we'll go into more detail about why other things. So on a plot, one of the important things that you're going to always have on every plot is some kind of title block. Everyone does theirs slightly different. There are templates available on in Vectorworks that you can use. Some people have drawn them and keep their own in there as well. You can make your own template and use your own, or use theirs. Or when I first started, I was drawing them from hand. So you could draw the lines and make these boxes, but there are tools in Vectorworks that allow you to do that more effectively. So talking about the drawing, over in your title block, you're going to make sure there are certain components. One of the first things that you're going to do is always make sure, I think you can see my mouse, but you're going to see what the actual page that you're looking at is. So we use the drawing title, and this is our light plot. On Broadway, that's going to generally refer to the overheads. I'll have a separate page that's front of house, and all the other sheets that we'll use, a section, any detailed work, and everything else. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to put who it's drawn by. In this case, it's initials for AP, which was Anthony Pearson, who's one of the best associates out there in New York. We always list a file name for it, what it's saved under, and how we route and navigate to that file. This becomes a big thing when you're in an office like Ken Billington. They have very distinct how they name every file so that you know which version you are and everything else. At the bottom, you can see I've got this thing called sheet number, and this is page 1 of 9. That lets you know immediately in any drawing package that there's going to be 9 pages. That can be different on every show you ever work on, but you should know how many sheets there are so that your electrician knows exactly what information they're looking for, so that they don't miss anything. The same thing, you always have the date that it's issued to everyone else so that they can make sure they're working off of the most current paperwork, and a scale. A scale lets you know how big it is. So I don't know how many of you guys use the scale ruler or anything like that, but that's saying that for every ½ inch in this drawing, it represents 1 foot in the real world. So that's kind of how to read that bottom section of a light plot, lets you know what you're looking at and everything else. The other thing we do is, like I said, we always brand everything. So I'll use the show logo and then include some of the design team. the director, the choreographer, the scenery and costumes, lighting, sound, special effects. This can be done in many different ways, and I have several examples that I uploaded to show you different ways that that's been done with different designers and everything else, but you do want to include the design team and give credit where credit is due. You're using a drawing that is usually partially done by scenery because you're uploading their information and everything else, so you want to give credit to them as well. Right above that on the plot, you'll see this little section that has the different issue dates and everything else so that you can know if there are any adjustments done to the plot and you know exactly where we're looking on each page. You can see that we're currently on E, which is New York opening. So this is kind of our as-built that we finish at the end. The other thing that we do above that is we have what's called our union bug. So this shows us that this is property of Natasha Katz. She was the lighting designer. She's lighting designer in the Union 170, which is very early on. Mine is a much later number, but it has her kind of information there that we can see. The other thing that we put on every plot is a little disclaimer. This simply kind of says that we are responsible for the visual of this and for the ideas, but we are not responsible for how it is actually built and stuff. There's other people who are responsible for those kind of things. So that's all in there. It's something that we all put on there. One thing to note is that's actually not a fully legal binding thing. Several people have come into issues with that, but we always put it on for our safety and to protect us. Let them know that if there are any adjustments that need to be made, that they should do those things and get back to us. So you can see most of them are fairly similar, and there's several examples, but every plot you'll see from Broadway or for regional or from the United States with the USA, it will have some kind of disclaimer saying what show it's for, that it can't be used anywhere else, and that it's owned by the designer. The next section above that is a key. This is like a legend on a map or anything else. It's going to show you the type of lights, what they are. We also put the wattage on things because you can use multiple watts. Whether it's dim or doubled, it needs to be 77 volts, or whether it's 575 if we're lamping down, or 750 to lamp up. The other thing, we can do, these are all the conventionals with things. Then we'll put just a little cap on the back of the same source 4 to let it know if it's a luster, a color forward. Those are just different types of LED caps that can be put in any of the ETC source 4 fixtures. And when we use them, we just want to make sure that they know exactly what it is. Same thing if you're using a C changer or color scroller on the front. But that's what that is. And that's why it's grayed out, is because it can go on any symbol whatsoever. The important thing is that it says if it's the source forward or C changer, etc. Same thing if it has a template, we do a little symbol that has a T on it, just to help you know what's in there and give you a visual representation of what's in there. More things, more just examples. They all say what they are, the different moving lights. The one unique thing that you'll find on a lot of the Broadway plots is if you look, this says arrow indicates the power cable. That's talking about what direction it's hung, so that when you're setting up your plot, everything's hung the exact same way, and it allows the programmer to know which way their encoders are going to spin, to know where things are happening. That is something when I'm laying out a show, I will actually call the programmer and ask them that question to make sure we're on the same page and we agree with how it's hung, so that they'll be as effective as possible with that. DTT, going down, more moving lights, more just different things. So that is essentially, that is the side of any plot on Broadway that's going to do that. So that will always be there. One of the other things you'll always have on a plot is if there are some overall notes for the drawing, you put a general note section that's going to tell them some of the basic things. For example, all units are 1 foot 6 centers unless otherwise noted. that just gives them the base reference that things are going to be tight together, things are going to be even spacing, and if there's any adjustment to that, we'll bring that to your attention. It also says in this that all the information about like top hats, what kind of gel, and everything else will all be in that light right document. On Broadway, when we're drawing a plot, it is used to hang it, not so much to actually build it. All these things get built in a shop in advance. They load that all up and they label it, and they'll do one pass where all they do is hang the fixtures. Then once they're all hung from the plot, they'll go back with the light right paperwork and different things, and that's when they go back and put in the information about what color goes in there and everything else. That's where you'll get that information. Literally, the plot is just about where the fixtures go. So we've got that. This is frozen. Let me talk about one more thing. Over here, we've got the hanging plot, where it will show you what exactly where everything is. When I was talking about that setting line, that 0, 0, we want to call that out specifically. So on this drawing, it says that the 0, 0 point is the smoke pocket, and we also call it the setting line. That's 0, 0. It draws to a point here, and that will be consistent throughout the whole document. We have, once again, a little label on here that tells you in this column here, this is going to be your distance from 0, 0, which is that setting line. In the middle, it's going to be the piece. And on the left, it's going to show the trim height. The trim height is the distance the batten or the hanging point, whether that's a truss, whether that's a batten, whether that's a pipe, whatever that is, to the show deck. We, in a section, we'll put a starting trim height on absolutely every piece of equipment that will ever go in the show. And we do a lot of work. And when they hang the show and load it into the theater, that's where they're going to put it at first to make sure it works. We might adjust it there before they finish that, but that's the start. I also do a few other things on here. If it's bold, which you can see right here, the ice bridge is bold around the outside as opposed to this one is not. That denotes that it's a working pipe. What a working pipe means is that it is going to be able to move during the show. If it's not a working pipe, you set it at a trim height and you forget it. You never touch it. But if it's bold, it means it's going to move, whether that's a stage hand flying that in or out, or it's automated, which we've denoted here, automated. It will show you, and you can very quickly see just from that symbol that it's moving. I also put a circle on it, which means there's power going to it. That helps the electrician know that we need to get power to that position. There's a light on it. There is DMX. There's something that we need to control, and it helps them allow all their cable looms and everything else that they need for that. So that's kind of what you're looking over at this side, and you can see all of that over here. That's going to be something else that's on every single plot on a Broadway show, a regional show, or anything else that you can see that. Great, so those are kind of the semantics about what you're looking at. Let me show you quickly the different plates that we have for this, and then we'll look at each individual plate and start looking at how we hung stuff, everything else, and get into some details about them. So page 1 is generally always the light plot. That is the overhead of the stage. That's going to show us what everything here. So this represents, you know, the proscenium, the front edge of the deck, and then every light that is upstage of that plaster line is going to be on that drawing. We have 9, so let's go through those and see each of those. Our next one is our front of house position, which shows all the box booms, the apron, the box rails, the balcony rail, the follow spots, the upper balcony, and the front of house truss. Once again, I'll go into more details about each of these, but I just want you to see kind of what is on a page, how they look, and how they're laid out. For Frozen, the next one is all of our side light, which is basically ladders. On Frozen, there were 2 in each wing, and they all moved. So once again, I'll show you all these notes and stuff in detail and talk more about this one when we get there, but I just want to show you that it exists. Our page 4 on this show was the deck. These are all things that are built into the deck. It's got different lights, footlights, things built into automation traps and everything else, rovers, etc., just so they see that. And then the next one, and some shows won't have that, most do. Let's see if I can get Vectorworks to keep up with me. This is a very large file, so. The next drawing that everyone will have is your section. I would say that your overhead plot, your front of house, and your section are the 3 most important pieces of information that exist in your drawing package. This is going to be between those pages. They should be able to hang 100%. And one of the things that we'll do as we're drawing these is, if I'm drawing from home, sometimes I'll show my roommate and be like, will you look over this? Do you have any questions? Or could you build this from that? It should show you kind of the angles that everything is hung, the heights, the trims, absolutely every piece of information, so that the electrician can do it. And if your drawing is good, they can hang the entire show and everything from that without essentially asking you a single question or without you being in the room. And that's why, once again, that paperwork is so important. Let's look at a couple other things just to show. We also did on this one, we did another section that is at a smaller scale. So it shows you kind of the whole front of house and the rest of the space, just so they can see more. But this doesn't give you as much detail. So that's why we have the zoomed in version. But this is where you kind of show your sight lines between the follow spot booth from each of the positions, make sure that the audience and trim behind borders all works and everything else. So once again, we can go into more detail on all of these drawings. I just want to quickly show you each of the things that we'll be talking about to give you a brief overview. Loading next page. Great. So that's upload. This is front elevation showing kind of where the side light all hits in relation to the proscenium and stuff, so that the electrician knows the overall view that they should be seeing as they're building this. Once again, just another tool to make sure all the information is there. Unique to Broadway is you start to get a lot of Scenic Electrics and different things that maybe in a regional production you don't get as many of those. But we have bed units, for example, that have lights all built into them, snow effects and different tricks. We show, you know, the sight line between the border to show that they need to be out of view, everything else. And the same thing on this. We've got our, you know, front elevation, our overhead plot, and our section. Same thing with, this is a unit called Oaken's Trading Post. Once again, showing where the lights go, every information that they need in multiple views so that they have all the information necessary. Let me quickly show you these other sheets, and then we'll talk in more detail about the actual drawings. Here are just some other ladders that we use. And once again, we don't publish this, but here, and I know some of these are in the tech table, but we do the tech table. We draw out the tech tables where everyone sits and what information needs to be on their table, etc. Let me check and see if I've overwhelmed anyone. It looks like questions. Move this over. Does Broadway usually require a full revision schedule, or is it denoted as a version number and or distribution date enough for the most part? So typically, I will do revisions with my electrician and my designer. By the time it's built in there, I'm pretty much frozen. We kind of decide on a time where there are going to be no more changes until it gets loaded in. And that is the plot that they use to build the show, to load it into the show. Anything else I'll do once the show is completely set up, and then we'll do a revision. The revisions we use a lot when there is a negotiation with the shop and the shop order and big things are changing. Other than that, I'll keep them on the same and just use open communication and notes until we're ready for a big change. Tom talked about other templates that get got. Wesley asks, I noticed that Natasha Katz has an IATSE union symbol next to her name. Is this common? I thought most designers were a member of USA. So that is both true. USA is a subsidiary of IATSE. So USA is actually in the IATSE union. My newer bug has both the IATSE logo and the USA logo on it. Natasha has one of those original, and when she joined the union, same thing with Ken or anything else, it was just part of IATSE, so there wasn't the separate association. So that's why it has just that bug for her. USA Local 1, unions are confusing. I know, don't worry about unions right now. If you have more questions about it, we can talk about it, everyone else. Ben asks, working pipe, that just means it moves live during the show. DTD, that got answered. I think stiffening versus rotation, full drafting theater, check sight lines. Do you use a full drafting of a theater to check sight lines for side light fixtures? We typically on Broadway, most of the theaters have a drawing. Sometimes you'll get them in a DWG, which is a CAD drawing, and you'll upload that. You'll also get from the scenic designer, they'll have a drawing that you'll have to upload. If I can't physically go to the theater because I trust the associates that I have collaborated with, I will ask the last associate who was in the theater and see if they will give me their plot. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll delete stuff off of it. Just because I go, that's the last thing that was in there. If there are any changes, it will be the most updated plot to work from. So I do that. Yeah, that's what I do. But yes, you absolutely do all your sight lines, and you should be able to, with a section and with your drawing, you should be able to figure out all your sight lines before you ever get in the room. You're shaking, someone pumping into it. That's stiffening. I assume it was to do with preventing sway of moving lights. We'll talk more about that when we go into detail on the positions and stuff. But I'm going to go back to the plot for a little bit, and then we'll come back to some of your questions and show you some details. So on Broadway, we have several different things. You're going to always show, for example, the boom left, it's showing the position of it, but because it's a boom and all the lights are underneath it, we have that grayed out, which means that it's going to be on another plot. So I still want you to know where that light is in relationship to everything else, but you're going to need more detail to hang that position. So I have a whole separate plate that shows that. One of the important things on a Broadway is everything needs to be labeled. You want to give them the information as clear, as concise as possible. So this position, one boom left, it says that it's 19 foot, 3 inches from center line and -2 feet from 0, 0. That's your plaster line here. The other thing that's unique to, I think, a lot of USA drawings, especially for Broadway, is most people literally just put the unit number and what light it is. We do not put channels. We do not put any of the other information because it just muddies the drawing and makes it harder to see. And when you look at this plot, there's a lot of information. So we want as clear and concise as possible. That's also, I know Ken talked a little bit yesterday about line weight. If you'll notice in the plot, the bolder is, the more important it is. So we have on this plot, the lighting fixtures, and the numbers will be the boldest, most important thing on the plate. Everything else starts to get thinner line weight as it's less important. The other thing we show is we always do dimensions on everything. This is something I had never done until I kind of moved more to Broadway. And now it's very important to me because a lot of things in our plots, we're talking about an inch of clearance or less at times. So it's very important that that is accurate to everything. So you can see we've got projectors. We did not use unit numbers for that because it's not something our electricians had to deal with, but we left space for it. We show all the dimensions of each of them. And then we have our little note about our proscenium pipe showing what it is. There's more details on this on another drawing because this is actually built in to the set piece. And it tailed. One of the unique things about Broadway too is this tail down. It says tail down Vipers 3 inches to provide consistent hang height. What that is we want the pivot point of all of our lights to be at the same point so that they're all functioning and moving the same and that it looks the best in the air. So we'll build custom tail downs so that all the lights hang whether it's a bigger light. If you're using a revolution and a source 4, you're going to tail down all your source 4s so that they end up at the same position and will make their shots. So that's kind of what's going on there. Once again, lots of detail about all the information, where it is, how it fits, how it's hung. And the reason we put so much information on this is, once again, so that it can be built without asking us questions and that we get as perfectly hung as possible, because work notes in the theater are very expensive and very time consuming. So we spend a lot of work on these drawings and we want to make sure everything is clear as possible. So once again, we've got our ladders. It says that they're automated. It says where they're hung on each of the plot and everything else. We show our trusses here and what lights are on there. Sorry, let me come over to this side just so you can see stuff. Once again, same thing, unit numbers. It shows the arrow showing which way the power goes and everything else. Everything is dimensioned across the whole pipe, unit numbers and everything else. The other thing that is a little unique to Broadway plots is there are no work lights in the theater. There are no ways to see the stage. So we have to also plan for work lights, and that's what these little squares are. Yeah, any work lights, any run lights backstage or anything else we have to plan on. So that information is all there in the plot. Once again, I talked about that line weight and being the most bold thing on the paperwork. You can see here, I have very thin lines that show all the scenery and it shows the relationship to everything. But what's important to me is the lighting. So the lighting is much bolder. It's much heavier line weight so that you really can see the purpose of this drawing, what it's used for and everything else. And those are kind of a lot of the things on the overheads. I'll go back and look and see if you have any questions about the overheads before we talk more about some of the other things on the drawings. All right, so we've got a lot of questions. I assume. Do you usually work in 3D or do you draw the section on a separate 2D model? I go back and forth on this. Most of my drawings, for anything that I'm going to submit to people, I am using 2D. Yes, that means I have to draw it twice, both in the section and in the overhead. I know several people who use the 3D. When you're using the 3D, you really have to make sure that all your truss is exactly right. And I've spent a lot of time drawing those things in 2D before the 3D option was available. And I have a lot of that stuff pre-built. So I use the 2D. It also makes me consciously think about absolutely every connection and how it's built. Yes, it may take a little bit more time, but I know that I have thought about each one of those details, as opposed to when I do draft in 3D, I trust that it's right and I kind of move on, which makes me nervous sometimes when we're talking about very small clearance. So I still draft in 2D. I use 3D if I have a tight section I need to look at or anything else. Nina asks, when you receive a drawing from Scenic, are you doing any work to simplify their line work since it is generally CAD, or do you leave it as is when you import it? I do a ton of work. I can spend usually 2 or 3 days cleaning up a Scenic drawing. They're going to use a lot of classes that we don't want. I go through and I will delete stuff because some of them will include construction drawings and notes and everything else. And the point of my drawing is I don't want that on there. So if their classes are really good, I can turn off those classes and everything else to clean up their drawing. But yes, I will recolor their lines. I will readjust everything so that my things stand out and it's as clear and concise as possible. And that takes a lot of time. It's one of my least favorite things to do. And then anytime they send you an update or anything else, you have to do it again. So it is a lot of work to keep that. Do you use Viewports for hang cards? So on Broadway, I do the big sheets and hand those. An electrician will a lot of times make hang cards of specific positions and hand them to build front of house. The only time I make hang cards is for national tours. I will do a couple different layouts in front of house and do specific hang cards and laminate and give them to them so that they can use them in each venue. But typically I do my initial drawing. If the production electrician does it, they will make their own hang cards for their electricians, or occasionally they will ask me to do a detailed drawing for something that I can hand off, but typically they do that. Bridget says, I haven't typically seen red coloring dimensions. Safe to assume this is an acceptable style thing. Yeah, I don't think there's, one of the reasons I use it, okay, the red drawings. If you look here, we have very tight information between these two electrics. This electric is actually hung on the backside of the truss and it is married to the pipe, which means it's stiffened to the pipe downstage of it, and they have to work together. One of the reasons we use the red is just so that it stands out at a thinner line weight than anything else. Sometimes I use black drawings, but if all of this was black, it's going to be harder to see the difference between them. And that's why I've chosen to use red. So yeah, I would say that that is perfectly acceptable to use that. Yeah. Do you have a separate version of the plot that has channel numbers, or do you keep them only filed in Lightwood? Wesley, so he's asking if I have all the channel numbers. If I go into the drawing and click on this, I absolutely, once I lay it out, I put all the channel numbers, everything in the Vectorworks file, and it's there. And I do that before I send it to Lightwrite. Once I send it into Lightwrite, I will update some stuff, and it will, if I fix it there, it will send it back to the drawing, and I will do that while I'm working with it. Once I hand off the drawing, like I said, I do break that connection because too many hands are on the Lightwrite. The production electrician needs to insert all of their circuit information, all their power, and a lot more information to that. And I don't want that pulled into my Vectorworks drawing because my Vectorworks is the design intent, not the electrician and how they're working some of that stuff out. So yes, I put all that information in. I also have my symbols. When you're doing a label legend for the symbol, I can turn all of that stuff on, and sometimes while I'm working, I will change them all to a different label that shows the purpose, that shows the channel and everything else while I'm channeling through it, and then I turn all that stuff off before I submit it to anyone so that my drawing is nice and clean. Which Tom said as well. TTD, Tom's answering a lot of these questions for me. Thank you, Tom. Do you make your own LX symbols? Do you inherit them from other associate designers? I have done both. Most manufacturers now send out symbols. Vectorworks has a fantastic library that they update and send. There will be service packs that you can download and show new lighting fixtures as well. A lot of times in Broadway, I'm using brand new fixtures, and sometimes they haven't developed those yet. So sometimes I do have to draw my own. I also will take the existing symbols and add, like, for example, that arrow that I was talking about that shows the direction of the plug is not on most of their drawings. So I will add that in myself. And sometimes they will have a lot of detail on the light, and I clean it up once again to make it talk about the important things on the drawing. I've gone in and written performance and some of the names on them. So yes, I edit all my own symbols. I have inherited them from people. I will inherit others and then change the line weights to match what my line weights are and everything else. How do you feel about stuff like soft symbols? Soft symbols are fantastic. I do not use them. I think everyone who learned to draw on computer uses that stuff and have found it highly effective. I have my folders in my resource that I use, and that's how I do that kind of stuff. Joseph, sorry if it has been answered already. Do you use the inbuilt title block tool, or do you have a design layer and use it for the viewport? So Joseph, I have both. I started drawing completely by hand and things, and drawing every line and stuff that I used for years, and I had to really work out labor intensive, not effective at all, how much dimensions and stuff my title block needs to be. And I did that by, you know, taking old Broadway plots and measuring them with the scale ruler and doing it. Now I have used primarily the built-in ones that Vectorworks has provided. And then I have since taken those and built my own templates based on the ones Vectorworks has so that I can use their input methods and everything else for my shows, but it has been edited from what they originally did. When drafting a separate section in 2D, is there an issue with fixture duplication in software such as Lightwrite, or is it just a case I'm deleting fixtures, am I right? Okay, so Lewis, when you are putting in new lights in a plot, I have, and I'll show you these in a minute, I have symbols drawn that are actual lights. And then I have other symbols that are just symbols, that they have no information. So anytime you see like a grayed out light, I've made a duplication, and what that does is that shows it, but these don't count as lights. They are just symbols. They're no different than a scenic drawing or anything else, so it's not going to pull in any of that information. All of my section lights, because I will sometimes do different sections or a front of house section, an elevation, everything else, those are actually separate symbols for me that do not have the lighting information. My only symbols that have lighting information that would be pulled into the light right are the actual ones that are shown in the drawing in the overhead or on their specific page and has that information. So anything in my drawing, the symbol is only there as a light one time. Every time else, it is just a symbol. Do large packages usually contain cover pages, presentational or otherwise, or do you use an overhead plot as the first page? Typically, I do not use a cover page. Paul Tobin, however, he does a cover page for each show, and on that, I believe I uploaded one to the Dropbox. He does a little cover page that shows each of the lights, and it talks about what modes they all should be set in and what modes on the console they'll all be set in. If he didn't, I can show you one of those in just a minute. I don't typically do a cover page because I expect on the Broadway level, my production electrician knows all of those things, and that's why I brand each page. When I have to do a project for Cirque du Soleil or for NBC, they do make you do a cover page because their documents are a little different. They will do your plot, your shop order, and everything all in one package. And that's where that comes from, but I do not. Do I use Savvy symbols on Vectorworks? I do not. I have them, and I will pull them in sometimes. But typically, like I said, I've done all my drawing and my symbols, and I have my library built. The other thing Tim had asked me the other day is, do I have a base file that I start everything from? I do not. I use my last drawing every time, and I keep my resource folder really built. The reason I don't use a separate drawing as a base file is if I do that, I have to update everything in two places. If I build a new symbol or anything else, I have to then go import that back into my base file. So I always start from my last drafting, delete everything, and have it there. And that way, if I keep organized in my resource folder and everything else, it will automatically be pulled into my next project. Do you like to use different templates depending on different shows, like one for metric, one for imperial, etc.? Would you also be willing to show us what your Broadway template looks like? Yeah, I can pull some of that up. I do not use different templates depending on if I'm using metric or imperial. In the settings of Vectorworks, you can change a drawing from metric to imperial, and it will do all the conversions for you. So, for example, when I'm using stuff from the UK, most of them draft in metric, and a lot of scenic packages I will be drafting metric. I know inches because I grew up in the United States, so I will take the metric, import it that way, and then switch over to inches and everything else in my drawing so that it's a language that I understand quickly. Yeah, and then if I need to send it back to them, I can then convert it back to metric after I've done all my drawing and send it to them so that the dimensions and stuff are all in metric for them. Would I be willing to show us what a Broadway template looks like? So that's kind of like what this file is. Let me move over to an actual drawing as opposed to a sheet layer. These, once again, have a lot of information. I use, if you guys have never used before on Vectorworks, they have these things called saved views. My favorite thing I've ever learned. If you look over on my, I have on this drawing layers, but it's a lot of layers there. And classes, I can scroll for pages. Everything is filtered down in stuff. So what I do is when I'm drawing, so I don't have to reload what classes I want to see or anything else, once I set all of that, I do a saved view that will pull me back to I'm using front of house, and it will get rid of the information I'm not using so that I don't get bogged down with the information that I have. The same thing, I group everything. So if you look at box boom, if I want to edit the box boom, I have to consciously click on that so that it's there, and then I can come in and adjust all the things within the position. And that way, when I'm out of the drawing, I'm not going to accidentally click on something else or a layer that I don't want to have active or a class and change any of those things. That's why I like grouping things. I like using stuff in the classes and layers. I could turn on front of house. I could turn on an overlay and plot so that you can see all together in the overlay. This just becomes a lot of information. I've also found as I'm drawing like this, it bogs down my workflow and I'm seeing too much at once. So that's why I turn these off and really pay attention to the layer that I'm working at. And I'll spend a full day when I'm drawing. I'll be like, okay, today I'm gonna work out the box booms, and that's the only thing I focus on. I go back and forth between my section, my overhead, and make sure all the beam angles work, that I'm getting all the right positions on stage and everything else before I do that. Sometimes I will do these drawings of the box booms fully. Other places on my drawing, it will be a mess and everything else. And once I have worked it out, that's when I clean it up and make sure all the dimensions are right. And then I spend a whole day, once all the positions are done, I spend a whole day trying to lay out where I can put stuff on a drawing, because box booms, you know, this isn't actually where the box boom is. The box boom's over here, which you of course know. Sometimes I have to put them completely on their own page. Sometimes I can make that fit in the front of house. And that's why a lot of times, let me see, if I zoom in on the position, they all say booth, not shown in actual position. I will move around my front of house for a drawing to make everything fit. And then I'll squeeze in all the lights, you know, to try and get it pretty and look good. The position itself is drawn correctly, but it's not drawn in the exact dimensions on the actual drawing, if that makes sense. You were also asking about if I will look at Resource Manager. So, for example, here's my Resource Manager. I have a bunch of folders up here. So I can click on my source 4s. I've got the different beams, the components, the symbols, section and elevation. So for example, if I come to section and elevation, you can see that these drawings are just symbols and I have them at different degrees. I also have highlighted, sometimes I'll make this one's drawn in blue so it pulls attention to that. I then change it, and like if it's overhead, I have a different folder that has all my overhead ones. And it's one of those things that once you build once, you go, I don't want to change this each time I draw it. So I have separated those folders out and shown each one. I've got, you know, a front view, a diagonal up, a straight on, and stuff. And each show that I have to do a new one, I just save it and import it into that folder, and then I have it at all times. Come back over here. Let me see if there were any other. Sorry, going back to your questions for a second. Adam, when you get the drawing scenic packs, do you use the section and elevation from there, and add the lighting, etc., or do you make your own? I try and use theirs. At all times, I try and take their information and put it on. The one unique thing to Broadway is most carpentry and everyone else actually hangs the Broadway show from the lighting drawing. So you have to be really careful, and you have to make sure you're having those communications with the associate scenic designer and everyone else, because the electricians and the carpentry and everyone else will hang it from the lighting drawing. So we are really the last person to have it. And that's why we are so careful about the measurements and making stuff fit and everything else down to the T and looking, because you're responsible for a lot of the information that's getting hung and everything else. So you want to make sure you're correct. But yes, I use their scenic drawing and then I just clean it up a little bit. you find the grouping of lights prohibits the ability to use find and modify? No, I haven't had that problem in the past. But yeah, I also don't use it a lot. I very rarely in a drawing will I do a find and modify of full groups or anything else. I've kind of worked that out long before I would ever get to the point where I'm grouping them. Once I group them, it's really about laying them out into the overall view of the drawing as opposed to when I'm drawing it the first time. How does the LD communicate with you where they want lights? Is it more like a checklist or a paragraph? So every designer is going to be different. I talked about that a little bit earlier with Tim. When I sit with Natasha Katz, I will sit down and she will be like, I want, you know, a 2-system front light, or I want an LED front light, and then I will draw it, and I completely draw that, and then I will show it to her, and I will usually turn on purposes so she can quickly see that, and then we just have an open communication, and usually I will send her that document, and we will either call on the phone or we will meet for lunch or coffee type thing and talk over the drawing in person. That's always best, but if not, it's over the phone, and we go through each position and make sure that they have what they want. We also, a lot of these have a lot of time, and sometimes you get the next job while you're working on one. I did, while we were in tech for Frozen, I did 2 other shows with Natasha. So every morning on my coffee, I would meet her for coffee and we would talk about another show. And we'd be drawing that. And then once we were done with that coffee, we stopped paying attention to that and went full back to Frozen and didn't discuss anything else about it for the other day. Tom answering, grouping should only be a temporary solution to move something. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Trent, that's what, literally when I'm grouping these sections, it's literally to move them around and make them fit on the drawing itself, just to overlay it and stuff. The only reasons these are still grouped and everything else is I'm done drawing. I am no longer moving these. I am no longer switching the lights. This is now, I've grouped them so that they are solid on the drawing, and that if I want to make any adjustments, I'm making a very, very conscious, deliberate choice to go in and adjust the position. When I'm drawing it initially, it's not all like that. So, okay, there's some of the overheads. Let's look at some of the unique things that we'll have are units and wagons and stuff. So when I got a scenic drawing, I get a lot of information. I get drawings of set pieces, and sometimes they're hard to read. I'll be completely honest. Sometimes you get a drawing and you're like, I don't really know what I'm looking at. And you have to do a lot of diving into the scenery. Hopefully you've talked to them so you know some of it about it. But when you're initially looking at these things, none of these have been built. None of these are all being custom fabricated. So you have to quickly look and understand what's going on, because these positions are going to have to be built. For example, here is this bed, and you basically get that structure and where the framing is and no more information. We then had to sit and decide what things were going in, how we were going to light these, fit in, you know, special effects, fit in sound, fit in our lights and everything else. And this, once again, is only for the hanging lights for the electrician. I have a whole nother document that I can see if I can find if we have time at the end, but we had to make sure all these brackets and everything would fit, and we had to draw these completely separate with detail and with a draftsman, with the scene shop that was actually building us these custom frames and these set pieces to make sure that all of that would work. Yeah, let me look. So yeah, once again, the purpose of these drawings are not to build anything from it. It is literally to show where the lights go. If you need more detail, I will do that in a whole separate document that goes directly to a scene shop for them to use construction drawings and stuff. And we will send this to a construction, you know, I will call the shop and be like, we want to hang something there. Is there something to mount to? And sometimes they will put a custom bracket in for us or anything else. But yeah, you have to have those conversations and you really have to look at those things well in advance. Okay, so that is kind of the Frozen drawing. It shows you some of the things there. I'm going to show you some other drawings just so you can see that they are not all not all the exact same, that associates draw differently. Each project is going to require different requirements. Ground plan overlay layer. Oh, so ground plan overlay is something that we had from out of town to Broadway. I'll use the Denver drawing, which was our out of town, and I will keep that all done, and then I will put the Broadway plot in so I can quickly see changes. Once it's done, it goes away. I just left that layer because we have done and have try out a Broadway show and a tour. So I have different overlays that I can put on to kind of compare the shows back and forth. Not something that you necessarily need when you're just drawing a show itself. Do you ever spell out spacing explicitly or just leave it as a scaling drawing? Yeah, I do spell out, like that's why we have the dimensions there to show what the spacing should be. That's what all of this is. Sometimes on my front of house positions, I think I have a shared drawing that will do a large section because it's a curved pipe and it will say all of these lights are 1.6 if you don't have specific things. But yeah, we do the dimensions right there on the drawing so that they can quickly see that. Thank you. What info do the rigging team need and how do you represent that on the drawing? Okay, so that is something that every show and every carpenter is going to be different too. Once again, I will never say that I am a carpenter. I don't want to take responsibility for the rigging of it. I can kind of figure it out for myself and know. Luckily, when I'm using a truss, I know the stability of it. I know how many pick points they have to do. On this drawing, it doesn't show any of it because almost everything on this drawing is automated, which means it moves in the show and it was controlled from an automation desk from carpentry, not us. We don't handle that at all. So I don't show a lot of that on here. Same thing with our ladders. If they were, you can see I've got these little symbols here, which shows where the pick point would be on that ladder, how they are balanced and everything else. And then that's what this information is. Center line, 2 feet from 0, 0. And that shows you to that point on the drawing. So I always show, if it's a ladder or something like that, I show where these points are gonna be and then do the dimension to that. And then we will usually have a conversation both with my production electrician and hopefully they will have the conversation with carpentry as to what they need and how many they need. I try and stay out of that. If I really need to get involved, I can, but I try and let them take care of that based on my drawing. Do you ever meet with the Scenic team during your drafting process to discuss set items and how to integrate lighting into them? Would this be safe for production meeting? Both. So Alvin, when we are doing that, I have a lot of, just like I have good relationships with my designers, I have good relationships with a lot of the Scenic associates, and I will call them when I'm drawing a show and a Scenic package. If the second they finish a Scenic package, I try and get them to send it to me first so I can look over it. And we will have a conversation. If we are embedding LED tape or anything and we want a channel built into it, we will have those conversations and I'll go back to the Scenic design department before they ever publish them. So that means you have to stay really on top of it. And I do believe you guys have a whole day on Scenic Electrics, so I don't want to get too much into that. But yeah, you would have a lot of conversations going back and forth. Anything that has to have things integrated, you're going to go back and forth a lot with the Scenic associate to get those things worked out. We will also a lot of times do demos where we will mock up something and show to make sure it works. I try and keep that out of a production meeting because it's something that just needs to be handled between the two of us. The only time you're going to bring it up in a production meeting is if it's going to change the way the director works with it, if it's going to change the way, the whole layout of the show or a massive cost thing. Otherwise, we try and handle it internally so that everyone doesn't have to wait for us. Do you draft differently? Symbols, color, visible information, depending on the designer. Yeah, a little bit. My symbols are my symbols, and the designer doesn't typically care about that. So as far as symbols are, I don't change that for them. It's more about the layouts of each of them. When I send a plot to Natasha, I get rid of almost everything. And if I change anything for her, I have a way to change my lights to blue so that she can quickly see what has changed on a drawing and stuff like that. A lot of them, they are brilliant, but they don't want to get into the technical aspect. So I might turn off all of my notes. I might put a separate layer on it at the beginning that has all my notes on it and stuff. And I will turn that off so that has a clear and only the information that they need to have at the time. But as far as sending it to the electrician, it's pretty much my drafting style for them. If you're working for someone like Ken Billington, he has an office, and because he does so much stuff worldwide and you are working for Ken Billington Association, I believe is what it is right now, you adhere to all his drafting standards. And that's why he has a drafting assistant in the office and everything else, that all their paperwork, all their files talk to each other very effectively and things like that. But otherwise, I just use my symbols. ETD. Sam, are you saying that you have one drawing that has the out-of-town drawing, Broadway, and the tour, or are they separate files and you build off one another? They are separate files, Sam. Once Denver is complete, that is completely done. And I will sometimes flatten all that down. I will input that as an overlay, and then I will delete that. Primarily, that's to see what has quickly changed in a space and to see what we had before, check the angles, see if they're different, etc. See if when you have massive scenery changes, sometimes you could add 2 feet in between an electric. And if they do that, then we have to go back to a conversation about, okay, we're not going to be able to light this the same we did out of town. But yeah, it's literally just there to see the changes between the different productions, and then it goes away. I don't want any of that information to go to Lightright or anything else. So we'll just leave that there, quickly things. If I get a new drawing from Scenic, sometimes I will import the whole thing and put it in there. I'll check and see if any of it affects the things I've done. And if it doesn't, sometimes I don't import all those things to it. So that's kind of what I use there, so that I'm not muddying my drawing. If I find a big change, then I only have to go in and, like I said, I spend that whole day cleaning up their drawing. So I don't have to change the whole thing. I can just choose the section that has changed and clean up those few things to implement them into my drawing. Camille, do off-Broadway shows and theaters require the same amount of detail in their plot, or is it only a Broadway thing? It should be an everywhere thing. Plain and simple, you should give them as much detail as possible. The big difference between, I would say, Broadway and any of the other ones is on Broadway, all of this is built in a scene shop off-site. So this is completely built and put together long before it ever arrives in the theater. This allows you to load in, and it comes off a truck. It goes right together. The trusses get pinned together. They get attached to their point and flown out. You don't get a look at it at all. The trick is getting it off the deck as quickly as possible so other people can work. Typically, if you're in an off-Broadway theater, your plot's not going to be as big, and they're going to build it on site. So once again, the more detail you have, the more effective they're going to be about putting it up quickly. And I would say that goes the same for regional theater or anywhere else. Once your schedule starts getting big and stuff, I, a lot of times, don't show up to the theater until the day of focus, which means they've hung everything and built it all without me there. So I want them to have as much detail so that they're not calling me every 5 seconds. If they're calling me with questions every 5 seconds, I haven't done good enough on my drafting. They're not able to read it. So the more information, once again, allows them to do their job without stopping you for questions all the time. So yeah, it should be general. It should be the same everywhere you go. The one thing I was talking with Tim earlier about was on Broadway, I get paid for my prep work. I get paid to draw. A lot of times when you're doing a regional or off-Broadway or a tiny little black box theater, you might get a stipend for all your work. So I, try and do as much as I can, but sometimes I have 2 days to draw and I might not get to some of that detail. And part of that is you pay for what you get. You should do your best you can, though, to give all the detail and information as much as possible.
Tim, thank you. So I just want to step in case you needed a break, but thank you so much for showing us through all of those frozen drawings. That was a great hour well spent and a lot of detail. Um, I certainly, like at the beginning of this week when we talked about detail, what makes a good lighting design, a great lighting design, and it is detail. And I hope no one thought I was joking when I said that, but it is great to look at those drawings, and for sure there's lots of detail. Um, I just had one talking point actually I wanted to ask about, kind of just to relate to the UK a little bit. You know, a lot of people over here are taught a good lighting plot has absolutely everything on one piece of paper, and I just wondered if that was something that you were taught in America, how would that how could you do that drawing, and could Frozen have gone in off one piece of paper?
No. So yeah, when I do a national tour and stuff, sometimes I will adjust my scale to get everything on one piece of paper so that they have limited resources, you know, when they're actually on the road. A lot of times I will do separate detail stuff that zooms in and shows them those other, but then I try and get it all on one page. I know Hugh Van Stone really likes everything on one piece of paper so that he can see absolutely everything. And that's how I did start to learn to draw, but I wasn't doing sections as much before. When I was doing all of those things, I was really just drawing all the lights, and I would try and adjust it all into one page. When you get into Broadway, you're starting to talk about so much detail and stuff that it is really difficult to get it all on one page. And that's when I start separating and getting all of those added things.
And putting the right information where it's needed and when, you know, like the lighting, the reason why on Broadway the channels aren't on the lighting plot is because, as you said, it's all built off site anyway. And the lighting designer has a whole separate document to actually call it channels and light the show from. And that's a cheat sheet, which a lot of people don't really do yet in the UK. But I guess those are the two main differences.